Hello there, Michelle Short here for Pinkfresh Studio. Today I'm sharing how to change a holiday product into an everyday product. So let's get started. I'm using the Lantern Landscapes Joyride Stencils today, and as you can see they are designed to be used inside of the lantern. So this is the Lantern Landscapes die, and there's also a stencil set that you can add colour onto the lantern. But for today I thought I would use them in a completely different way. They are designed as a holiday product, but I'm going to use it as an everyday product, and I'll get onto that a little bit later. So I'm missing out the first image on this stencil here. This would colour in the background, but since I'm not using it as a lantern and I'm going to fussy cut this image out, I'm going to move to the second image on this stencil. So I'm holding that down with some low tack tape, and I am ink blending onto a panel of white cardstock. So I'm going to start off with my lightest shade of purples. I'm going to be using purples and aquas today, and I wanted the car to be all purple mainly, so I'm starting off with the lightest shade here, which is Sheer Freesia, and I want this to be a fairly light because, like I say, I'm using other shades of purple and I want to differentiate between the two, especially on the car. I want what I would call a bonnet of the car here in the UK. I think it's called a hood in the US, maybe in other places as well. And so I want that to look a little bit lighter than the rest of the car. So I'm going in with a fairly light hand. However, with stenciling, you do want to make sure that you go in lots of different directions with the ink to make sure that you're covering all of those tiny little nooks and crannies of that stencil. I'm also making sure here to colour in those two triangles with the ink. That's going to help me line up the rest of these stencils. I'm going to be fussy cutting this image out, so I'm going to end up removing those triangles. But if you're not into fussy cutting and you just wanted to do this on a panel, you would need to mask off those triangles so that you don't have them on the finished card. These stencils are pretty easy to line up without those triangles, thankfully. But it would be just a tiny little bit harder. But you can see here that I'm trying to line up those two triangles. But like I say, if you didn't do that, thankfully this particular image is fairly easy to line up without them. Just makes it a little bit easier with them. So I'm bringing in that second stencil here, and for this layer I'm using the Wisteria, which is just slightly darker than that Sheer Freesia colour. Again, I'm using that 1-inch blending brush. I absolutely love these brushes, they're really lovely and fluffy, give a really nice smooth blend. I know that the inks are going to dry a little bit lighter than when they go on, so I want to build up the layer of this colour. I didn't necessarily want to go to a darker colour at this point, but I do just want to make sure that I get a really nice saturation of this colour so that I can see the difference between that lighter purple that I added on first. So just going in, like I say, making sure to go in lots of different directions with that blending brush to make sure I completely fill in all of those stencil areas. I can then remove that low tack tape, and I do reuse all of that low tack tape, by the way. I use quite a bit, but I do always reuse it. And then I'm just going in with a cloth to remove that excess ink there on the left hand side, because I'm going to be using that part of the stencil for the next layer. Want to make sure that I'm not accidentally getting purple ink into my aqua layer here. So this is my lightest shade here of aqua, and I'm using Waterfall, and again I'm going in with a really light hand here. I am dabbing off the excess ink onto my scrap paper just to make sure that I get a really nice light layer of this ink. And you can see that my image is starting to come together now. I can move on to the last stencil here, and I wanted the lights of the car to be a different colour than the present, so I'm just masking those off to start with, and then I can go in with my yellow here, which is Lemon Whip. And there isn't a light there in the middle, that obviously isn't a light, but I'm just using it as all of the pieces there on the front of the car. Well, generally here that would be your number plate. I'm assuming that would be the same everywhere else in the world. So I can just remove that excess ink. I want to make sure that I don't get yellow ink for the next layer of these presents. And for these, I'm going in with a slightly darker aqua shade than I did for the first aqua, and this is the turquoise. And again, I'm going to go in with a few layers of this just to make sure that I get a really nice dark saturation of this colour. And then I can now go in with the last layer of these stencils, and for this I'm using Opulence, which is a really nice dark purple. And again, I'm going to go in with a few layers of this to get that really nice dark saturated colour. And so although this image is made to be a holiday product, or it's in the holiday release anyway, because it's a card with presents on the top, I thought it would work really nicely for a birthday card. You could also do it for any kind of celebration that you would have presents with, but birthday seems to make sense for me. So that is my image all complete. I'm going to set it aside for those inks to dry while I work on my sentiment. I'm using the sentiment that reads "It's Your Birthday" from the Basic Sentiment stamp set. I'm going to stamp it down onto some black cardstock, and I'm going to heat emboss it. So I want to use an anti-static powder tool. I do like to remove that excess powder before I ink up the stamp using Versamark ink. This is a clear sticky ink, so that when I add the embossing powder on top, it's going to stick to it. So I'm just inking that up really well, and then I can stamp that down onto the cardstock. So just pressing firmly there, not too hard, but enough pressure so that it transfers that ink. And then I can apply some white embossing powder. And I do like to apply this a few times. I haven't got a huge amount left in my pot here, so just picking a little bit more of that up, tapping off the excess. I do like to apply it a few times just to make sure that I get a really nice coverage of that powder. And then I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool, and I do like to heat set from the front and the back. This helps not only to prevent warping of the cardstock, but it also helps to make sure that I don't overheat that powder. If you overheat embossing powder, it does tend to go a little bit grainy, which doesn't look particularly nice, so I'm just making sure that I don't overheat that, and I can move that embossing gun as soon as that powder is melted. And then once it's all done, I do like to kind of wave my cardstock in the air a little bit just to make sure that I cool that down. I can then go in with a dry cloth and try and remove that anti-static powder. Now my powder bag is fairly new, so I'm getting quite a lot of powder on my cardstock, so I'm just using my sleeve there of my cardigan just to remove some of that excess powder. I have then cut that down into a strip, and now I'm going to cut it into two. Now sometimes you can absolutely cut it in half and you're going to have nice kind of border around each word. In this instance I didn't think I would, so I ended up stamping and embossing this twice. You can mask off the words and do them separately, but sometimes I find it easier just to do the whole sentiment and then have two there separately and cut them apart. I now want to fussy cut my image out, and I like to kind of remove some of the excess cardstock first and then go in with my scissors to try and fussy cut this out. I am leaving a small white border around the image here. And when I'm fussy cutting out, I try my best to try and keep the scissors fairly straight and move the cardstock itself. Now sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I will say I don't feel like I'm the best at fussy cutting. It does take me quite a long time to do it, and usually I do have it really close up to my eyes. I'm trying here for it to be done on camera as I'm filming, so I've got it a little bit further away, so it's not as neat maybe as I ordinarily would do it. I do go in afterwards and neaten up a couple of the areas, but actually I didn't think it was too bad. But I do just take my time doing this. This is sped up to double the speed, so you can see that even at this rate it is somewhat fairly slow, I suppose, compared to maybe other people. But I just take my time. I'm trying to have it so that that white border of cardstock is somewhat similar on all around the sides of this image. But like I say, I do go back in and cut a little bit of it off on the places that it got a little bit thicker. Obviously there are no dies for this because this is not how this product is made to be, but it's really nice to be able to use it in different ways. And thankfully I don't mind fussy cutting out, but I know that it's not for everyone. So like I say, you could definitely do this on a panel of cardstock and not have it as a separate layer. So now I've got the elements of my card ready, I can start assembling. So I'm keeping it really clean and simple today in design. I have a panel of white cardstock that's cut to 4 1/4 inches by 5 inches, and I'm adding some thin profile foam tape onto the back of this. I like using a slightly thinner profile tape, especially if I'm going to have multiple layers. That's just definitely personal preference. I am making sure that I'm adding a lot of this foam tape onto the back of this panel because it's going to be adhered down onto my card base. I want to make sure that it's really nice and stable under there. You could definitely do this with layers of cardstock if you wanted to build up that dimension, or you can just add it flat or something like that as well. There's also foam sheet, lots of different ways that you can do it, but I do really like this thinner profile foam tape, so that's what I'm going with today. I am just using quite a lot of it, as you can see. So I can now remove the backings off of that foam tape, and then I'm going to adhere it down onto a black A2 sized card base. So that's a finished size of 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. I thought that it would be quite nice to have a strip of the black card showing at the bottom. That's going to give me kind of like a little bit like a road, or just an area for me to be able to place the car on so that it's not kind of floating. So I'm just being really careful here to try and line up this panel with my card base. I'm using that scrap paper underneath so that I can see if there's any kind of black peeping out of the sides there. And then I can just make sure that that's pressed down really well. I've then added some more of that thinner foam tape onto the back of my car and present image. Can remove the backings off of that foam tape, and I can place that down onto my card. And like I say, I'm just adding it towards the bottom there, so it kind of looks like it's placed down onto that black piece at the bottom. I've then got my sentiments here, just figuring out where I want them to be placed before I stick them down. So I can use some more of that thin foam tape onto the back, and I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap here. It's going to look a little bit strange, but I know that I want to pop an embellishment underneath this, and so it's quite nice to leave that gap of the foam tape, so I've got space to add that embellishment there. And then I can just do the same thing here for the top sentiment. I'm just going to add it on the right hand side because it is going to overlap the present slightly, so I can just use a little bit of glue tape runner there on the other side, and then I can adhere that down. And I thought it would be quite nice to have the sentiments a little bit wonky. And then I can finish off by adding some embellishment. So I'm taking some clear craft glue, just adding small dabs of that onto my card. And then this is here where I want this embellishment to be popped underneath. So I'm just going to hold it there because automatically we'll kind of want to push back out. So just holding that there for a little while that glue dries. And then I can finish off by adding a few here around the sentiment strips. I'm using the Lilac clear drops today. I thought that the lilac would work really nicely with the purples that I've used on the image. So again, just adding small dabs of glue there, and then I can pop this one here underneath that sentiment. Since it doesn't have that foam tape on that side, it did fit in really nicely. And then I can pop another one here in the center of these sentiment strips, and then just add 2 more on the other side. Since this card is so clean and simple, I thought it would be quite nice to add a little bit more colour and embellishment with these clear drops. And then if I've got any excess glue, I can just go in with the other side there of that embellishment tool. And that is the card finished for today. Really clean and simple, like I say, but it's really nice to use that Joyride stencil in a completely different way. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.